Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly. And voila! You get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. And like always, we try and find the most brilliant people inside and outside the world of HR to talk to you about what's happening in HR data, analytics, technology, and process. Today, we have with us Al Adamsen from the People Analytics Future of Work Group. Al, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Here we are, day 2 of the Expo, Las Vegas, 2022. It's massive, and it's a lot of positive energy. Great things are happening. I'm glad I'm here.
Can you believe the number of vendors and the number of potential clients that showed up? It's just unbelievable, given last year.
Yeah, last year, if you weren't here, was pretty much a ghost town. We expected or hoped last year would be what, in fact, this year is.
Right.
You know, a big coming out, you know, post-pandemic. And obviously, we're still in the pandemic, so I don't want to diminish that.
Right.
At the same time, there's such an appreciation for HR technology and the value it can deliver. And obviously, when we were working remotely during the pandemic, in most industries, most organizations, and now with hybrid work, return to workplace, you know, we're creating digital footprints from a data perspective. How do we analyze what's ethical, what's appropriate, what are the data privacy, you know, all that stuff is now being talked about in a very mature way. So from an analytics perspective, it's no longer nice to have. It's a non-negotiable. We're thinking about it as a lead product, as opposed to something, oh gosh, we're not there yet and we'll figure it out, you know, downstream. It's now becoming more front and center. So very excited about that.
And I think one of the fun things about the last few days, after everything you just said, which is absolutely spot on, do you think that maybe some of the people that attended may be a little confused?
Oh gosh.
Because of all the things they're seeing here? 100%. I mean, it's very overwhelming.
It's, you know, you and I are in the space, and I'm not going to speak for you, but even for me, you know, walking around, I'm like looking at the map of, you know, vendors and seeing the new startups and scale-ups that are emerging and the size of some of these booths. And like, there's some firms that grew up. So, and their value propositions have expanded. And so what does that mean from a buying perspective? You know, how do I make meaningful distinctions among these vendors? How then do I make wise decisions? It is overwhelming. And that's frankly one of the things that I'm focusing on. And I know there's a variety of other firms. You know, how do you sift through all this noise and make good decisions, thinking with the end in mind? And for our profession, you know, what insights do you want to generate? What experiences do you want to create? What data is going to help you understand the employee experience, the worker experience? And so I just, you know, again, I'm biased because I'm in these discussions and I nudge them in a certain direction. But at the same time, the literacy around data and analytics has elevated, you know, over the last 5-10 years. And I think the pandemic has certainly been an accelerant towards that. So yeah, there's a lot here.
Okay. But before we actually get started on the topic that we're going to talk about, I know it sounds like we already covered it, but one fun thing that no one knows about Al. So remember we did one last year.
We did. Do you remember my answer last year?
Nope, but when you say it, I'll definitely be able to tell you what it was.
Was it beach volleyball?
Yes, it was.
It was beach volleyball.
Yes, it was.
I can't do that.
By the way, you and Holger.
Yeah?
Beach volleyball.
All right.
Holger did it while he was in Germany.
Good to know.
Younger. Oh, yeah.
See, I want to be walking around this expo with a ball because there's super high ceilings and ask people to pepper. And
the really funny thing is you're so tall and thin, people are going to be like, he grew up on a beach. He's got a ball.
That's what he does. How to not make friends. So the other thing that I'll say, it's somewhat related, is I worked with the Positive Coaching Alliance for nearly 9 years. They're at Stanford University. They leveraged, among other thought leaders, Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. So I conducted workshops for youth and high school coaches, parents of young athletes, as well as young athletes themselves, as well as administrators.
That's amazing.
So that was a massive learning experience for me. And people ask, well, how you speak publicly and how did you do that? And it's like, well, I did 200 plus workshops with Positive Coaching Alliance, in a variety of forums, setting things up here and there. And it helped me be obviously better in front of people, but more importantly, it helped me understand the role of leadership, and obviously in a coaching capacity, but as a parent, how do we not only coach the high-performing athletes, but the whole team? How do we honor the individual's contribution? So I don't have to draw a long leap to how that applies to talent and people strategy. And so, that's my little tidbit. I work with the Positive Coaching Alliance, and honored that I did.
So let's talk about what happened in 2022 in the world of people analytics. Obviously, one would hope that people analytics had its coming out party. We said it every year, by the way. Yeah. But as you say, companies are using people analytics more so. Let's talk about 2022 in terms of what did you learn?
Hey, this is Brent Skinner, host of Small Talk Window here at the Work Defined Podcasting Network. Have you ever wanted a short podcast to listen to during a coffee break of your workday? You've come to the right place. My guests dispense with the small talk as quickly as possible and settle into a meaningful conversation around the world of work.
What surprised you and what did you expect? Let's first start with what did you learn in 2022 about people analytics?
I've been thinking about our chat, and I reflected on what I shared last year around continuous work transformation. I still stand by that. I do want to highlight a couple things that relate to Josh Berson's conference, a key theme in this event around talent intelligence and skill-based planning, and also the fact that there's a lot of vendors that are here that are helping elevate career and personal development. And so how does that happen at scale and in intentional ways? And so this is what I want to say as concisely as possible. Talent intelligence, when you're looking at internal talent markets and external talent markets, and you're understanding supply-demand relationships, skill adjacencies, appropriate learning experiences to get people capable in certain jobs, and we can talk about work without
competencies,
jobs. All that stuff. It's where does that live? What's the operating model that's going to help organizations realize the value proposition that's being put forth? And so Josh specifically put forth a narrative around talent intelligence and people analytics being a subset. Now, I love Josh. I love their research. And however, being a people analytics practitioner, there's not many people out there with talent intelligence jobs, but there are a hell of a lot of people out there with people analytics jobs. And when we talk about data privacy and all the legislations that's imminent, we have to be thinking about how we're using people data, and in turn, how we're using it in terms of analysis, distribution, and all that stuff. So where I'll bring this home is that I am so happy that Stacey Harris's research put HR analytics, depending on the company size, number one priority.
Excellent.
And I'm just like, fantastic. You and I have seen that before, though.
Yes, we have.
But is the actual investment going to go? I believe we are there. Like, it's a non-negotiable, like I said at the outset, that investment is going to go there. It has to go there because that's where the insights are going to be generated. No longer is it just a transactional system that's going to carry the day. It's the insight that system vis-a-vis others is going to shed insight so I can make appropriate decisions at scale, at speed, in sustainable ways. So I believe talent intelligence is actually a subset of people data and analytics. Workforce planning lives in that ecosystem. Learning lives in that ecosystem. And diversity, equity, and inclusion lives in that ecosystem. So that's where, when I look at these technologies, people, data, and analytics leaders need to be in the conversation about what tools are selected, what data is going to be generated from those tools, and in turn, you have boundaries around, that's not appropriate, and some transparency into the algorithm so you're not perpetuating bias and things like that. So a lot of good things, but we need to mature the operating model to actually realize the value proposition.
So you're saying that the people analytics leaders also need to think about it, and I know you're saying this because I know you've espoused in the past, that the ethics of the inputs as well as the result need to be front and center as being part of not just the development of the analytic, but also of the actual process and of the policy.
Right. Yeah. So let me just draw an example. Your listeners are probably aware, and if not, they will be soon, of what's happening in New York City. If you are residing in New York City, so if you're in a hybrid work environment and you're exploring hiring somebody from New York City, there's certain data privacy laws that you're going to have to abide by, even if you're not based in New York so this is going to happen more and more as we go in the future. So we need proper data governance, and that's going to inform what we can and cannot do in terms of vendor selection, in terms of algorithmic integrity, all this stuff.
Absolutely.
So there's that piece. Business still has to get done.
Yes.
Okay? And employee experience is something that we've heard, time and again, and there's data, there's solutions that shed light on, number of meetings, pulse surveys, active listening, passive listening with ONA, all this stuff. Sure. At the end of it, for the sake of what? The number of vendors here, it can get really, really noisy.
Yeah.
So if there's a capable people analytics leader, they're going to have to find these boundaries, prioritize, and in turn deliver on the promises that they're making. Right. And again, that for me takes conscious decisions with a governance body that's not only HR related, but it involves workplace, it involves legal, it involves IT, digital transformation, all that stuff.
Did you see that there was actually a law that was being put forth in the assembly in California that would have made it a rule that you expose to your employees all the uses of their data, and that employees could opt out of the analytics and algorithms you're using their data for? And I've had this conversation a few times on the HR Data Labs. One of the things that we're talking about is that might potentially put an end to a lot of the things that not only we do in people analytics, but have a normal course of business, like benefit planning or compensation planning or other things. And I know you're not talking about that stuff as draconian, but even if we look at GDPR, GDPR itself, from what happened in the European Union, gives employees the rights to control some of that data. And so I think what you're saying is that people analytics and people analytics leaders need to have that competency, or at least borrow that competency from legal or compliance to be able to bring that into those worlds.
100%. So you asked the question, am I aware? Absolutely yes. And what I would say is going to be essential is that there needs to be elevated governance between people analytics, HR, IT, legal, of course. Yep. And because, just to fast forward in time real quick, and this is imminent in my view, right now it's going to be an opt-out as far as I understand it. So you can opt out. But is there going to be a day where it's going to be an opt-in? And let's just assume that for a second. If it's an opt-in, I'm only going to opt in if there's going to be value to me as the individual, as the generator of the data. Historically, I join an organization, I sign an employment contract, embedded in the fine print is that these are our assets, including the data, therefore we can do whatever the hell we want. Right. And there's certain stipulations, so I don't want to be, but at the same time, that's not going to carry the day any longer. And there's going to be shifts and moves at the state level, national, international level, and it's going to be dynamic. So staying up to date, staying current, having a risk mitigation strategy. So if someone gets turned off, are you going to be able to turn it off? The essence of GDPR, as you know, is the right to be forgotten. Yes. And so, in some cases, if there's not benefit coming back to me and I feel that the data being collected on me is exacerbating or perpetuating bias, then I'm not going to want that, collected.
But then again, that makes self-insurance from an employer perspective impossible. So you can't get health benefits. We won't be able to cost your compensation plan, so you won't be able to get an increase. And in fact, in some ways, you're not going to be able to participate in learning and development because then we can't put you in learning systems. So there's a lot. I know you're not going there, and I know I'm being a little bit of irascible at this point and kind of over dramatizing this, but there are so many things that it brings up in terms of business not being able to conduct business if those things happen. And I know it's being done for the right reasons, or at least it's being done for the California reasons. Right. But you're right, though. It's not just California. It's New York and other places, too.
Well, just a quick comment on that. About a month ago, it might have been 6 weeks ago, as you undoubtedly saw, the New York Times article that your employer's monitoring you. Yeah. And it had a very negative take on what we as people analytics professionals are doing. And I know it pissed me off as well as a lot of other people analytics leaders, including vendors, because we're doing our damnedest to advocate for the worker and do what's right. And there's going to be this tension, and we want to acknowledge the tension and do what's appropriate. To just like take a step back and not take advantage of the benefits, and the cost is just too great. To your point. We're trying to take care of your health. We're trying to improve your employee experience. We're trying to improve diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, all these things. If we don't have the data, we don't have the insights, then we're not going to be able to learn and adjust over time. So we have to acknowledge the tension and celebrate it and get in there and constantly iterate and just be smart about it.
By the way, before we leave this topic, I just got to tell you, the opt-out scares the crap out of me. Because one employee opting out means the data set's inappropriate or the data set is invalid anymore, because it's not just the N, it's N plus 1, N plus 2, N plus 3. One person leaving, all right, maybe, it's a blip. But it's just the start of a rolling ball downhill, and it's going to gain momentum.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. It could be a cohort, a critical cohort, a diversity, female, black women, and just, that's redundant, but you get the idea. Who knows?
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Salary.com. Now, back to the show.
And we've had John Sumser talk about AI ethics on, and we've talked about people analytics ethics in the past. We all want to do the right thing. We also don't want to have to get new rules created like FCRA, like the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which then force our models to go through a governmental organization and us having to pass audits on these things. So we're going to have to be probably towing a very careful line about how we develop things and how we get it tested, and making sure, as you say, we're partnering with the right legal resources, compliance resources to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right reasons. And God forbid it ever gets to governmental oversight.
Well, and that's just a touch on that too. There's, as you know, human capital reporting requirements that are coming down the pipe, at the state level, federal level. If an organization is aligned with the B Corp movement, there are still additional measures that would be associated with that. By the way, shout out to Yvon Chouinard and what Patagonia did yesterday. They made Earth their only shareholder.
Really?
Yeah. It's pretty astounding. So they created a whole new ownership structure where, in fact, the profits to Patagonia go into a trust that benefits the Earth. Yeah,
congratulations to them. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's the case where, and again, I don't want to go off on Patagonia, but historically they have been a public benefit corporation, and you're
actually advertising them on your jacket.
I am advertising my jacket, and my college roommate and a longtime friend, Jill Dumaine, that's her married name, that's why I hesitate, rose to be the head of sustainability or supply chain there. And then she went on to be a CEO of Blue Line Fabric. So I've been a huge fan. And Chris Mason was there doing people analytics for a long time. And so we were talking about, and Caitlin Cavanaugh, so they have unique reporting requirements going back to that theme. And they're for a purpose. It's stakeholder relationship management. It's like, how are you doing right by the employees, the customers, the environment, the communities in which you do business? And I would love to see that become more the norm. And in fact, you go back, now 15 years, Firms of Endearment talks about stakeholder relationship management, how they actually outperform companies that had a solely financial focus or primary financial focus. So going back to what we're doing in people analytics and HR in general, there's the business cases are out there. It's just a matter of getting it right for your organization at this point in time. And that's going to look different organization to organizations. We just got to learn. And learning, how do you learn? Data.
Right. Well, I would say, and I'd love to see people publish, like, I don't know if you saw Martha Coakley and Dr. McKinnon published in LinkedIn an article they had done on creating an AI around employee data quality. Not only publish, but also put all of their data and put all of their research on GitHub so people can download it and learn from it. To me, it's good if one company does things like this. It's better if they do things for the public good by telling the story, not just the business case, not just the use case, but then publish the results publicly so we can see what did they do, what did they mean, and what do they mean to do, test the hypothesis, and then actually show us what they did so that we could do it. And I know that sounds obviously very data scientist and, going back to my roots and not everybody's going to want to publish their intellectual property, obviously. But in order for us to all learn and grow, fail, learn, grow, it would be really cool to get, as a data scientist, to get other people to publish their research like that.
Yeah, I've seen that happen in the peer group that I ran for years. We did that to an extent, but you're right. There's some of that, like with my show, PAFOW Live, which sorry for...
No, totally cool. We're going to actually put links to it as well.
Okay. That's what I try and do, is highlight the use cases, both the success stories and the challenges in a verbal narrative, supported by slides. And if there's a deliverable associated with it and it's open to be shared, put that out there. What I really want to highlight, because I love the idea, and it needs to happen at scale across industries. There needs to be an openness. Going back 20 years now, having been in the field for that long, I know back in the day, so to speak, there was a hesitancy not only to do the work, but to make the work visible, because it implicitly made leaders look bad or potentially look bad. In other words, I made decisions. That's a suboptimal decision according to the data. Therefore, I don't want, and it's a very scarcity mentality. Sure. I know. Yeah. But fast forward, there's a new generation of leadership, new open-minded, and it's, as opposed to an outcome that's quote unquote not good. It's like, whoa, there is actually room to grow here. I can shift, and there's opportunity here. And there's no such thing as a perfect answer. Where human behavior is effectively what we're talking about at scale. So it's always going to shift and move, and bring in the external factors, the disruptions that are happening constantly. Everything from digital transformation pre-pandemic to the pandemic itself to what's happening politically. Black Lives Matter. It's just like there's going to be disruptions ongoing. So how can we as leaders be prepared to deal with those? And we don't have the sentiment data. We don't have the core HR data in terms of where people are working, what they're doing. Then we're going to be guessing, and that's irresponsible.
To me, the best way of knowing, and I've said this before, so I apologize to everybody. The best way of knowing success is knowing what it's like to fail and being able to see all those things. And you're talking about business cycle stuff. Yeah, things like these things have happened in the history of politics and economics and social issues. We had Kent State. We've had Watergate. We've had political, social issues that have almost brought the United States down. But they didn't, because we're resilient and we learn from those mistakes. We learn from those problems. Yeah, okay, some things we don't grow and learn by enough, but those failures make us who we are. And I understand what you're saying, and people tend to shift away from that because they don't want to be seen as failures in leader. Well, but the best leader I've ever worked for not only told us about his failures, but celebrated them.
Thank you for sharing that story. And just a quick anecdote. I wrote an article. I don't know if it's an anecdote now I say it out loud, but I wrote an article on Memorial Day, I think like 4 or 5 years ago. And it was when political tensions were starting to elevate. Sure. And I reflected on my history at university, where I understood that we as the United States were like a medium-sized country. We weren't a global power pre-World War II. Even post-World War I, we were just kind of muddling along. Right. However, World War II started, and we did damn near miraculous things. We commanded resources that had never been organized and created outputs at a rate and a level of quality that was unprecedented in human history. In other words, we learned at speed, at scale, and in sustainable ways. Yeah. And what I fear about American society right now is that we're not doing that. We're not doing that governmentally, unfortunately. We're not agile. We're kind of this old crusty thing, and I love this country, but I want it to improve. I need for it to improve for the sake of my kids and our posterity and frankly, the global community. So not to go further down that road, organizationally, I reflect on Adam Grant's book, Think Again, and where he was promoting think like a scientist. And that means you're unlearning. You got to be open to unlearning. You got to be iterative. And so it's not as a leader that I know the answer. It's like, okay, this is what I believe the most appropriate answer is at this point in time, this recruiting strategy, this development strategy. But I'm going to collect the data, I'm going to analyze, and I'm going to find something new at some point, and I'm going to have to shift and move, and I'm going to celebrate it. And I'm going to have a team around me that's also going to be similarly agile, and that's how we're going to win long term.
Right.
The minute I say, okay, this is my 3-year vision, I'm
done.
sticking.
Yeah.
I was like, you're done. You're
Right.
going to be this old crusty thing.
Right.
So anyway, I thank you for allowing me to go on that narrative.
No,
But I think it's
cool.
important.
That's cool. And I get so excited talking about things like that too.
Yeah.
Hey, are you listening to this and thinking to yourself, man, I wish I could talk to David about this? Well, you're in luck. We have a special offer for listeners of the HR Data Labs podcast. A free half-hour call with me about any of the topics we cover on the podcast or whatever is on your mind. Go to salary.com/HRDL consulting to schedule your free 30-minute call today. Let's shift, though, and talk about 2023 and where we think people analytics is going to go in 23. I know it's only a few months away, but it's enough of a putt that I think we can be a little bit artistic about it. Where is it going in 2023?
So there's a lot of talk here about skills, capabilities,
Yes,
and all that, and skills-based workforce planning. I'm all in. I support it 100%. I'm going to own my bias or structure of interpretation, whatever you want to say. We're talking about skills and human beings still like they're an infinite resource. We're all constrained by time.
Yes.
So you look at, the burnout rates, quiet quitting, the great resignation, all this stuff, even as the economy is struggling a little bit, there's still mobility in talent markets.
Yes,
and it's
there
like
is.
you still got to compete for that talent, day to day. So we have to, understand capability. I talk about the 4 C's of workforce planning: capability, cost, construct, and capacity. Usually I put capability, capacity, cost, construct. Construct being how the organization is designed.
Right.
But that capacity thing is still a blind spot for most organizations. In other words, how many people do we need to do work?
Right.
And
Scaling up and scaling down?
scaling up and scaling down, absolutely. But it's not like I grew up, as I've long said, in the suck it up generation.
Yeah.
You as well. It's like
Just get it
you're lucky
done.
to have a job.
Yep.
You throw work at them, they'll
Right.
figure it out.
Right.
And like young people, particularly high value talent, calling bullshit on that. It's
Yeah.
like, no, you giving me 40 hours a week pay, and you're giving me 60 hours a week work.
Yeah.
We dealt with that.
Yeah.
And they're saying, nuh-uh, I ain't gonna do
By the
that.
way, we did it. We didn't say anything about it. We were complaining under our breath.
Right.
But we did it.
Right. And they're not complaining on their breath. They're voting with their feet and they're moving on. So there is a balance there, but we have no elasticity. We have very little elasticity in most jobs.
Right.
Someone has a stomach ache or have to go pick up a kid or something like that. It's like, okay, now my performance, is taking a hit because I had to go pick up my kid from school because they weren't feeling well or something.
Which I think is very unfair.
It's grossly unfair. So we have to create more elasticity in people's lives organizationally. And sometimes that means contingent labor, automation,
Right.
but we have to be conscious of the work and how the work gets done and the very real constraints that we as humans have.
Yes.
So what's happening in 2023, I think that's going to become more front and center. And that to me is a key component, like I just said, of workforce planning. Okay, it's not only about skills and hey, we're getting the right skills in here.
Right.
Do the people with the right skills have enough time to do the work, particularly if it's creative work, or do they have the capacity to, iterate and learn and collaborate and do all those things? So I'm exploring some projects with Rob Cross and Greg Pryor and Michael Arena on this front. It's like, what is collaboration overload? How do you mitigate the risk of that happening? And where it lands for me, it's like time. Do you have time to actually connect with people, both on a personal level and to develop your career?
Yeah, not to sound strange about this, but that's very timely in a world where we're trying to figure out how work gets done from the remote versus hybrid versus in person, and make sure that companies are okay with there being some ambiguity right now.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out how and I think I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I might be, flexibility and being able to provide the ability to give people space to be able to be human while at the same time getting the output that we expect from them.
Correct. Yeah. And it's a tough balance, but like we talked about earlier, it's continuous learning.
Yeah.
And it could be based on life stage. I'm an empty nester now. Hard for me to say and accept, but I am. Wow. So I have more capacity than I did even a year ago.
Yeah.
Is there any data set that understands that? No, but the footprint, the data wake that I create would highlight that, hey, he's actually having more meetings and maybe he's more productive than he was. Am I a better person? Do I have more skills? No, I actually have more time.
But that's time, pardon me for saying this, but that's time you might want to think about investing differently.
Correct.
In the equation of 24 minus L equals W,
Right.
where we look at the leisure time. Again, I'm an economist, so look at the leisure time as being the thing you control, not the work controlling you,
Yep.
which is 24 minus W equals L. but and that's really an important thing. And maybe I'm being stupid about this. Most people let work rule their leisure time.
Correct.
When you said that, that's what I heard you say. I heard you saying, I'm going to flex, because I'm an empty nester now, I can flex my W. Is it really flexing your W, or is it you giving back to the company in order for them to achieve what they need to?
It's both. For me, I want the choice. I might want to stay working, I'm just going to make it up, 40 hours a week and not willing to put in, 50 hours a week, spend 5 hours on a Saturday. Maybe I'm not willing to do that, but maybe I am. But I want it to be my choice. I don't want it forced upon me, particularly at this stage of my career and life. For younger people too, they feel this pressure
Yes.
to perform and fit in and all that. And arguably, and I'm going to just use the word, there's systematic bullying going on and say,
Yes,
hey, we have the leverage, we're paying you.
Yeah.
You just do what you're told. And, I think most of the younger generation, they get criticized for not, being resilient enough. It's but their capacity for bullshit is a lot less than what it was. And for high value talent, it should be.
But you and I have both gone through downsizing. We've both gone through layoffs in our lifetimes where people around us have been let go and we've had to pick it up and suck it up. Correct. And put it into our job. And what I hear you saying is that younger people are going to say, screw that. I'm not going to let that happen to me. If you take away somebody's job who works with me, and you think I'm going to pick that up, you either better pay me or I'm out of here.
Correct. And we had fewer options than they do. There's more people in the talent market.
Right.
Now talent market, certain job families are grossly constrained.
You're the fourth person I've talked to today, actually, about the economic demography of our labor market.
Oh gosh. We talk about people analytics, that's where I get like this, and going back to what I was saying about, Josh, framework. And again, I'm not picking on it. I'm just an observation and having an exploratory discussion on it. I'm looking for me, having been a practitioner in people analytics, I was also influencing, I didn't own, but I influenced workforce planning.
Sure.
So I'm looking at the system the workforce sits in. So in other words, the macro talent markets.
Right.
And if I don't look at that, relative to the organization itself, it's overly myopic.
Right.
Particularly given the movement in and out from alumni networks to talent pipelines coming in. Right. So we have to be looking at that level. And plus we have the systems that are on the floor here that you provide that data. When I first started in the field, like it was about collecting all the data ourselves and putting it into a technology and staging it and testing it and then producing. Now we just buy data.
Yep.
And there's plenty of tools that can stage it for us and we can do the analysis. So again, it's a leader choice whether or not we get this insight into talent markets, both internally and externally, and understand the career profiles in certain geographies and so forth. So it's here to stay.
Do you think that's going to be able to influence governmental policy? And again, I'm not trying to get into politics, but governmental policy around the H-1s and the immigration.
100% yes.
Why aren't we?
Because going back to what we said about the United States before, we're not agile enough. We're not creative enough. It's like a political discussion where it's just be a matter of fact. We look at the American system, meaning our talent is grossly constrained, particularly in I use this term because I like it, high value talent.
Yes.
It's like whether it be engineers or nurses. So, if we are going to supply that talent this needs to be done by human beings, and we don't have enough here. We got to do something.
Import it.
We got to do something.
Yeah. That's basic economics.
Yeah. And I was talking to AJ Herman from Cleveland Clinic, who leads workforce planning there. And we were talking about this very fact. They are looking at consciously automating, consciously outsourcing, consciously bringing in talent from wherever on the planet to get this work done.
Right.
But they understand the work. They understand the systems, both in terms of talent and potential automation opportunities. And it's like, get on you. It's like, as long as we're doing it consciously, there's no such thing as perfect, but we have to learn and improve over time. And that's the best we can do.
Al, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
David, likewise, man.
Thank you so much.
We'll do it again next year.
Enthusiasm and energy. Yeah. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to test our hypotheses about 2023.
Right. Yeah. Capacity. That's my word for 2023. So
there you go.
All right.
Al, thank you so much. Take care. Stay safe.
That was the HR Data Labs podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. And if you know anyone that might like to hear it, please send it their way. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.